Hi, I'm John Green, and this is Crash Course US History. Today, we're talking about two things that relate to Captain America: politics and power. Yes, Stan, I know he's not real. The role of politics and power affected US history even before the United States was titled on a globe and when we were still one with the green. In the 1700s, France and Britain started fighting over New World territories. One of the main reasons was the abundance of fur in North America. This would lead to conflicts in the Ohio River Valley and escalate to become the French and Indian War. Skipping over the details of the war, I will just get straight to the point. British won, France lost, and now the British colonists were stuck alone on a newly won piece of land and free to do what they want with it. What did you say, Stan? Yes, there was the Pontiac's Rebellion and the resulting Proclamation Line of 1763, which ordered the colonists to stop settling west of the Appalachians, but you should know by now that the colonists treated it like toilet paper, Stan. So what good came from this war? Well, for one thing, it gave colonists more freedom, as the French were no longer here to annoy us, and two, it showed how power was shifting over to the colonists when they completely ignored the proclamation handed down from the throne. Thus foreshadowing. Stan, can I get the foreshadowing effect? The American Revolution. Now suddenly, with the ratification of the Constitution, America was truly the United States. Or not. What came to be was a long-standing tradition of American partisanship, championed by the two-party system dominating from 1797 to present day now. What you will see is that America became divided along party lines against the wishes of George Washington and formed the Federalist Party and Democratic Republican Party. The Federalist Party, formed by Alexander Hamilton, would support a strong national government, while the Democratic Republican Party, formed by Thomas Jefferson, would support states' right and an agriculture utopia. These differences are known to exist for checking the power of the opponent and to keep the democracy alive, while also keeping alive politics. Poly meaning many, and ticks meaning blood-sucking parasites. Stan, what is this? Good old politicians. But of course, none of these political parties would stand the test of time, since political parties are just like diapers. You change them once, they get spoiled. With the power shifting to the Jacksonian Democratic Party and the Whig Party, created solely to destroy Jackson in the 1920s. This recycling of parties was due to the ever-evolving issues of the current generation, such as when the issues of slavery boiled over and caused the split of the Democratic Party, and also resulted in the formation of the Republican Party. Oh, it's time for the mystery document? The rules here are simple. I read the mystery document, and if I guess the author correctly, then I don't get shocked. But if I do guess it incorrectly, then I do get shocked. Now let's see what we have here. Neither here nor in any part of the world is the right of suffrage allowed to extend beyond one of the sexes. This universal exclusion of women argues conclusively that not as yet is there one nation so far emerged from barbarian and so far practically Christian as to permit women to rise up to the one level of the human family. Oh, Stan, why'd you do this? Well, let's see. They're talking about women's suffrage, so I'll guess Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Am I wrong? Oh, Stan, I hate you! I really... Wait, who was this, Stan? Garrett Smith? This Garrett Smith? Who the heck is Garrett Smith? Nobody knows him in the history of history. Ugh, this is donks. Well, apparently, Garrett Smith was a women's rights advocate in the Liberty Party. Early on, Americans were already beginning to experience the taste of democracy, and now attempted to get more with reform movements in the 1830s, which allowed those without a true voice in government, such as women, to have a voice. Women would take advantage of this medium and lead the charge in movements such as the temperance and asylum reform, looking at you, Dorothea Dix, and eventually culminate in the decades-long fight for women's rights and suffrage. These early reform movements were to improve American society and enhance the idea that everyone should have equal opportunities and rights. These ideas would carry over to the civil rights movement. So in case you have forgotten, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments had been passed in the 1860s after the end of the Civil War, granting African Americans the right to vote, yet the federal government seemed to have forgotten about it for 100 years, requiring the citizens rise up to the injustices by themselves in the 1950s. Although African Americans were supported to be granted the ability to vote, they were still limited by poll taxes, literacy tests, and the Grandfather Clause. After being suppressed for almost a century, African Americans would finally gain civil rights, which I will talk about later. While many reform movements sprung up to fight for change, some, such as the conservative movement, sprung up to fight against change. The conservative movement was in response to an era of tremendous social change in a short interval of time, brought about by the increased demand for the acceptance of gay rights, feminism, and abortion. This fight to oppose change brought a new slew of conservatism that shifted the direction of politics from that of encouraging change in social reform for the benefits of the many to one that stifled such reform because it seemed as if reform was treading into immoral grounds, such like how slavery was once seen as moral and restrictions of women was seen as right. Now, whether you believe it or not, it wasn't just the public that wanted to change society to help out the disadvantaged, but the government also joined in the action. Yes, the government. During the years of the Great Depression, whether you like it or not, Franklin Delano, Tomato, Roosevelt would greatly expand the government's role in society by promoting mass government programs that would bring about the new notion that the government's duty is to actively help the lives of citizens, known as the New Deal. FDR championed the idea of hands-on government that regulated the economy to create safeguards against the future depressions and turn the country into a welfare state with programs such as the Social Security. This position on the role of government would be echoed in the program created by Lyndon B. Johnson, the Great Society, in which a set of New Deal-like measures would be put out to fight the poverty present in society. Johnson would add onto the social programs of the New Deal through health insurance programs such as the Medicaid for the elderly and Medicaid for the poor. These periods demonstrated the incredible power of the liberals at the time as they churned out legislation from Congress, as they had never heard that Congress was designed to never do anything. The conflict between Republicans and Democrats that can be seen throughout American history and in the initiation of social welfare programs has its roots in the differing interpretations of the Constitution that started with the ratification of the Constitution. The opposing groups are known as the strict constructionists, for those who want a limited amount of government interference in American life, and broad constructionists who believe that the government has many implied powers under the Elastic Clause. This will lead to the creation of the two-party system of the time, the Democratic Republicans and Federalists. This split in politics was most prominently warned against by Washington in his farewell address, which stated, "Parties serve to organize faction, to give it an artificial and extraordinary force to put in the place of the delegated will of the nation, the will of a party, often a small but artful and enterprising minority of the community." Washington is speaking of the danger of a division in the country, which has since resulted in countless arguments between the parties over how to resolve situations through differing methods, such as how Hoover, a Republican, believed that Americans could get through the Great Depression by themselves with rugged individualism, with help of the trickle-down effect of money put in large businesses, while FDR, a Democrat, believed in creating numerous federal programs to actively support citizens. Because of how ungodly Americans believed our form of democracy was, of course someone had to come up with the bright idea that we should spread all of our American joy. Roll the Libertouch, Stan! Post 9/11, George W. Bush would decide that it is time again that America should spread democracy and began the overthrow of Saddam Hussein's oppressive Iraq regime. The Iraq War, which actually ended fairly quickly, then became an issue with insurgents divided along sectional lines, quickly overran Iraq, and you guessed it, attacked the occupying troops in an attempt to obtain political power. This hatred of American forms of freedom and even democracy showed that people don't take too kindly when others' nations come in and force their way of life onto foreign nations. This oppression of other countries brings me to the topic of oppression in our own country. After World War II, the African American Civil Rights Movement became especially powerful as the African Americans took to the courtrooms and nonviolent protests for support of their movement. Alright, let's go to the thought bubble. One of the earliest demonstrations in the civil rights movement was the Montgomery bus boycott, kicked off by Rosa Parks refusing to move to the back of the bus, which resulted in her arrest. This violation of the notorious Jim Crow laws began a string of nonviolent protests led by Martin Luther King Jr. Thanks, Bobble. At first, these early tactics were not enough, as the president still tried to stay away for civil rights issues, in fear that it would be political suicide and lead to the lost support from Southerners. But later, starting with Kennedy, the president would start tackling the problem. While Kennedy started it, Johnson was the one who really brought the issue to the forefront, as it was a problem to be dealt with in his war against poverty. And under his administration, Congress would pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964, thus giving the movement more force. After the Freedom Summer and Selma March violence, Johnson would take advantage of the turmoil to enact the Voting Rights Act of 1965, thus cementing African Americans with the Democratic Party. The continuous support of African Americans from Johnson would cause a rift to appear with the Southern Democrats that was most apparent in the election of 1964, when the only 6 states that the Goldwater carried was his own state of Arizona and 5 solid South states that were traditionally Democratic. Throughout American history, many issues and attitudes of the people toward those issues would shift the power between different parties. What may have once been seen as moral can just as quickly be seen as immoral, and what that means is that to stay in power, you have to understand that the will of the people, or if you don't like to change it. Okay, thanks for watching. See you next week. Crash Course is made with the assistance of all these nice people, and also through your support. Mrs. Arnold is the best.com. Mrs. Arnold is the best.com is a volunteer service where you can thank Mrs. Arnold for all her Arnoldness and knowledge she gave us in this amazing school year. And thanks for watching Crash Course, and as we say in our hometown, Bob or die.